So let's go back to reality, what's happening here in day-to-day, in actual life, and talk about the internal and the threat to our strategic strength. I want to bring in three very significant person, Gadi Eisenkot, Chief of General Staff, of course, Knesset member, Amir Pardo, previously head of the Mossad. Where are you going to be seated? Okay, wait a second, just a moment. All right, no. Okay. Major General Reserve Amir Eshel, previously the former IAF commander, and Ben Caspit will be our moderator. Senior commentator in Maariv, Channel 12, Meet the Press. What else? Okay, that's enough for now. Good. Okay. Hello. Good afternoon. Very glad to be here. I counted 120 years of experience in defense, and I didn't add my 3 years because that would be too pathetic. But what brings together these 3 gentlemen? Amir Eshel was the longest-standing IAF commander, correct? I'm not mistaken? The longest in the IAF command. And, 41 years in uniform. You were 41 years in uniform, you, sir. You're not in uniform anymore, right? But you're still of the state in service, and you were 30 years in the Mossad, and God knows how many years in, of course, Shaldag and other commando users. And a first sergeant is going to ask you questions and interview you. Well, the name of this, strategy in the days of uncertainty. I mean, nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow, so it's a very apt title. But we're going to begin with talking about this session's topic. How do you see, for example, Major General Eisenkot, Lieutenant General Eisenkot, the strategic threats to Israel? Worse than before? Better than before? What's happening with the internal threats? Is that the biggest thing that we face at the moment existentially, and the biggest threat to the Zionist vision? Good afternoon. Every year, the big organization IDF and the National Security Council do these conferences. And for us, this is a national review. And there's a methodology of threats, internal threats, external threats, economy, other threats. And at the end of the day, there's a part that's called strategic changes, and that's usually reserved for the enemies, some enemy regime, agreements, international agreements that have been violated. What's interesting in 2023 is that the strategic watershed moments happened within Israel, not because of some external force majeure, no, because of the decision of the Israeli government to do this legal revolution, government revolution, this coup, and there's a strategic change, I would even say, a strategic injustice, I would call it, and stupidity that has threatened us economically, socially, internationally, in every respect. And there's only 2 issues really that we need to address initially, but in terms of budget. That's education and the IDF. Now, national education, which is the foundation, the thing that brings us all together in terms of our values as a society, it was deeply harmed and violated in recent years, and particularly with the current agreement. And just to give you a couple of facts, today, 52% of the kids of Israel study in state schools. Of those, 86% go to the IDF, meaning if you look ahead where we're going, and we're continuing to deathly harm state-run schools and core curricula, we can see where it's going to take us. Another issue is the IDF. The IDF, which is the security belt of the state of Israel, in these days is now standing at the Knesset. There's a Knesset, there's a bill, a Torah-studying bill on the Knesset table at the moment in order to finalize what's considered an imposition of enlistment. You can't, it's not difficult to imagine the harm to the state of Israel and Israeli society if this recruitment bill is passed with all of its limitation. And the existence of the IDF as the People's Army will, of course, be threatened completely. Now, you are responsible, from the Mossad, you're responsible for this region. We are in a strategic retreat or a kind of strategic bloom. And especially with all of the tendencies that were Sundays from the Saudi states and the Emirates and everything, and everybody's sort of coming nearer to Iran. There's also talk, also from the Americans, we heard from the ambassador today, about an agreement with the Saudis. So could you make order out of all of this mess? Well, first let me address what Gadi said. I think the biggest threat to the state of Israel is not from the outside, it's from the inside, and that is absolute, black and white. We can see that from the beginning, in the middle of the last decade, we can see the direction that we're taking. And from the goals that were set by previous government administrations, I'm putting the transition administration aside because that was the exclusion to the rule. And after the last round of elections, we have a combination now. I mean, in China, there used to be a period that was called the Gang of Four that tried to pull China in an opposite direction from where it needed to go. For us, we have a Gang of Five that is trying to lead this country in the exact opposite of Zionism, the exact opposite of the logic that's instated Israel and made it a miracle in the Middle East for over 70 years. So I give the names of who are these five, the Gang of Five. We all know them. Then help us out. Just a moment. But when we look at what's happened in the last 5 months, it's the greatest loss of value the state of Israel has ever known. I'm not even talking about the internal problems, the economy, because that's something that happens every day. But internationally, it's the biggest loss this country has ever known. Our status was that of a superpower in the Middle East, where all of the countries around us would like to do business with us and talk to us. And now, the moment that this plan, the moment that the coalition agreement was signed, it was absolutely clear that this country has now self-destructed. We've started our self-destruction countdown. We saw the Saudis getting closer to Iran. We've seen close discussions between the Emirate states that have never been conducted in the past and are being conducted now. We're seeing what's happening with Syria. We're seeing the conduct and the very clear statements by Jordan as they understand what is happening in Israel. And we can see what Egypt is saying. We can see what the Europeans and Americans are saying. The state of Israel, in a decision in the last elections, and this has decided to go to a dead end. That's it. You were left here to maybe comfort us. I'm a party pooper, so no way. But the three of you know the threats. And with all due respect to the Israeli superpower, the fact that as Iran has enriched uranium for enough 5 nuclear warheads and within a few weeks is expected to reach 100% full, nuclear deployment, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's the legal reform that's the biggest threat. If we compare the state of Israel today to the conference we had a year ago, Israel is in full retreat. We are, and it's in every field, not just one discipline, one field in which you say, okay, we're sort of backsliding. No, everywhere, in every field. We heard many lectures about the strategic status of the state of Israel, which is built on several pillars: our economic strength, our technological strength, our military strength, that has made us a strategic asset, as he said, a unique strategic asset in the region and maybe in the world even. Now take all of these parameters in these 3 pillars and their impact on strategy. All of these, everything are going down. They're on the decline. Economic situation on the decline. Technologically on the decline. The high-tech market, look what dilemmas they're facing. We heard talks in the Knesset a day or 2 ago. In terms of the military is strong, sure. But I am so concerned, and let me tell you why. Because if you don't continue to move forward and build your force to the future, and the other side, the enemy, does do it, then you are backsliding. And I don't see how you give the IDF the resources it needs with the budgets that they're talking about, how we continue to move forward. No. And the significance of that is that the required measure of strength that we will have will not meet the necessity, the needs of tomorrow. We're not starting from zero, we're not starting from scratch. We are in a strong position, but it's being eroded daily if this trend continues. And these three pillars, of course, impact, they are the components of our strength. Israel is the gate in the Middle East to what? To the United States? A lot less than in the past. Not to mention, of course, Israel's status within the United States as among the public opinion. I know that it sounds weird, but you are the head of the IDF, let's say. And we all talked to you and Benny Gantz. We said you'd never go to the political life, and you did. And you're even together. And you are you have a sort of broad national identity, one of the last few. Now, from the Knesset, do you believe that this view of Israel and its nationhood will overcome the chaos that we hear from the other two speakers? I'm talking about the budget, about the legislation, everything that's happening right now. I think that what we've seen in the last 4 or 5 months is not the legal question. That's the trigger. What we have is something much more profound. The direction of the state of Israel. Is Israel going for the kind of vision that we had initially, where it was clear that we were a Jewish, liberal, equal, progressive state like the Declaration of Independence, or are we going in a different direction? And there's a whole accumulation of actions that were taken that are now manifest in our political weakness as a country. We can see that the government budget is an expression of the overall weaknesses and coalition agreements. They have nothing to do with strengthening the state of Israel. Nothing to do with that. Because of political needs of the Prime Minister and political parties, we get what we get. This is the result. The Prime Minister stood 4 months ago before the Knesset and talked about the key major objectives of the Knesset. Going against Iran, peace with the Saudis, reducing the price of living and improving the economy, and returning personal security. That's what he said was the most important thing. But in the last 5 months, all he's done is pass legislation in order to strengthen his coalition status. And we can see this everywhere, in every direction, across the budget. That the Prime Minister is not trying to strengthen the state of Israel, but rather can continue his regime, and that's of great concern. I still believe that I believe that the modus operandi of the State of Israel remains the same, and it was established in our earliest days, and that is the real commitment of the State of Israel to its citizens, to its welfare and education and medical needs, and taking care of young people and old people, and making sure that we keep order and law, and everybody is in service to the state, and the state is in service of its citizenry. And what we see now are things that are harming the State of Israel, and it's done by rational, so to speak, people that we've all worked with, and we can see now they're making decisions that are completely against that. What do you do with it? Well, I think that, and here I hope that the events that we see today in a decade will look like something that woke up the State of Israel. And we can still turn maybe this crisis into an opportunity. I believe that major parts of the coalition do believe the enormous injustice of this so-called legal reform, that even the Minister of Justice says that if we accept it now, we will no longer be a democracy. Have you heard people from the coalition saying? In private conversations, in corridors, yes. That's encouraging, but less encouraging is when they have to face the public and they have to vote. They don't vote they vote with their party. So I want to do my role. I want to sort of start a fight here. Because Gadi talks about the national approach, and when there are discussions now in his party and also in the opposing party with the president, and there are things that are being discussed, and you said that there should be a movement involved. We shouldn't let things stand. Maybe we're missing something. Israel has changed. Demographics have said, have their factor. Are there a factor? The Haredis are almost 20%, or will be in the next decade. Maybe we need to understand that there's a big public that wants a change, particularly in the legal side of things, and that we shouldn't aspire to some heroic victory of democracy because other elements of society see democracy differently. I believe that almost 90%, if not even 95%, of the citizens of Israel will choose a democracy to live in. I'm no doubt of that. Whether they're nationals, whether they're ultra-Orthodox or national Zion or religious Zionists or not. Now, when you look at dictatorships across history, had you been able, throughout the development of these regimes, you would almost always have gotten that kind of a survey answer. They want democracy. But those countries collapsed and became dictatorships, and they paid the price. And the price is horrific. It's always horrific. And Israel is on the path to that. Not because the majority of Israelis wanted, but because within a manipulative political system, we have managed to come to the worst of the worst. That's what happened. It's not a question of the so-called legal reform, but even if you take that as an example, you have Yariv Levin, the Minister of Justice, and the Minister of Justice has been saying and says that if the reform is passed, we are no longer a democracy. Can we come to a compromise with someone who that is their vision, who took an entire government of 64 Knesset members, absolutely legit, but took it in this direction? It's not a friction between teachers and the Ministry of Education about teachers' salaries. Should they get a bit more money or a bit less money? It's not that kind of an argument. At the moment, what is happening is something that I think is almost against logic, that somebody thinks the solution from Israel is not to be a democracy anymore. And if there are those fighting the good fight, Gabi among them, who are trying to find some middle ground. I don't know middle ground when it comes to being a democracy. I think what the protesters are doing today, they are the last stop, the last refuge before Israel tumbles down into a collapse of democracy. And people are trying to anesthetize this protest. And if they succeed, we will come to that moment of collapse. We are on the path. And as Gadi said, this budget right now, you don't need to get to a revolution, to a legal reform, so to speak, so quickly. This is a budget, a government budget of a non-democratic state. It's not putting its funds where it needs to be. Its priorities are wrong. It's not right for Yerucham or Netivot or Be'er Sheva or any other city in this country. That is what is happening today. And that is the major problem that we face. And I hope that Gadi and other members of the opposition manage in their fight. But that's producing lemonade out of these lemons is impossible.
There are places in the national camp, Gadi. There's room for more. Can you bring more friends, Gadi? There are parts of the public, and we argue, and when you meet people from the other side, they don't really know what we want when we talk about dictatorship. First of all, Jews. 2 Jews, 3 opinions. We know that every Jewish person has 2 synagogues, one that he goes to and another one that he would never step in. Do you see this in this doomsday view, that this horror show that indeed can bring about a dictatorship here? First of all, there is a risk, and it's a very tangible one. That's the first thing. And we saw it elsewhere. It's not the same case, perhaps, but when you landslide, you never know where you'll get to. What I'm troubled by more than anything else is the severing of the Israeli social fabric. And I'm saying this to both sides. Using expressions of war, decision, we will decide them either with democracy or with reform, using expressions from dark regimes that I don't even want to mention their names. Now, the economy, we can manage to rectify those trends, perhaps, and economy is bound to recover, and also technology, and perhaps even the military. It will be where it needs to be. But this breakdown is going to actually have ramifications for many generations to come. And it's not something that you can fix once broken. And that's the problem. And the protest did not contribute to this with the whole story of the conscientious objectors. And people said that nobody still said no. They simply didn't come to train in this court that you commanded for many years, this whole slippery slope. Now you refuse, tomorrow we will refuse, the other day somebody else will refuse. Where does that meet the risk posed to our national asset, the IDF? It's not only the IDF. Will the Israeli society will rise to very complex challenges, not necessarily on only wars. That, by the way, is very easy. It would bring them together. Our enemies understand that. They only need to sit on the sidelines. But will we be able to unite and contend to with the very difficult challenges, most of them are civilian, that will make us one nation with many identities, but we know how to coexist? Look, the whole idea of the conscientious objection, you're right, but that's an example of a cynical exploitation of an issue, and forget the facts. I mean, there was no one who said no to actually drive a wedge between the pilots and the mechanics, the flown mechanics. Look, every time I boarded a plane, and I did this more than 6,000 times, I placed my life in the hands of that mechanic who, with a cynical political approach, said that that's the second Israel. And the graduates of the pilot's course, I kept telling them that you have no value without the mechanic, without the intelligence people, and all this super elite that serves you. So there aren't any limitations of entering whatever space, making that division, and splinter the fabric. How do you overcome this? There's no one responsible adult that would say, hey, these things are not to be said, you don't even mean them. We have to think about the day after. What will happen to us? We are still in the day before. You got to sit in the Security Committee in the Knesset. What is the regular scene of threats? Say the Iranians. Is it a lost case already? And by the way, Netanyahu lost interest for some reason. Usually he gives 3-4 speeches on the Iranian matter. Now he talks about the Saudi Arabians. Where does it stand? These threats, are they dwarfed in view of what you're describing here? I have been talking about the Iranian threat. I was the military secretary to the Prime Minister, and today the Iranian program is in the most serious place since it was launched in the scope of enrichment and also in the distance left to actually turning this into weaponry. The State of Israel has two main threats. One is the Iranian, the regional, as well as the nuclear, and the second one is the Palestinian. In addition to terror, this means spilling over to a binational state, and the reality that we walk toward with open eyes, even though only 9% of the Israelis support the vision of the one-state solution. And that actually meets with many percentage in the Palestinian side. And there's one major threat, and these are the fingers pointed at us. This is the mutual responsibility, the covenant that we have in building this shared home, the cohesion. And this is the role of leadership to nurture. I believe that that is the most important thing. And here it returns to the leadership who would know how to approach the public and say the truth, set the path, and take courageous decisions and give hope to the state. It's very clear that in the last few years we're not there anymore. I told this story, and I'm going to tell it briefly here as well. A month ago, in the Foreign Affairs and Security Commitment, they presented the national interests of the State of Israel. I noticed that the date on the slide was the 22nd of December 2022. When the presentation ended, I asked it, is it something that the Prime Minister agrees on and the National Security Institute? Did you notice that you presented the interests of the previous government? And they say, whoops. So that shows the lack of seriousness that our leaders find in setting national objectives. And that's one of our problems. If I see a serious problem that threatens the State of Israel, then it's lack of leadership, lack of ability to make informed decisions while managing risks in an informed way And there's a lot more of looking into reality, spilling over or landsliding into a binational state party with 6 members of Knesset that actually talked about the topic in Reichman's Caspit that presents a program to pave the territory with localities to create a irreversible situation to cause migration. It's a crazy idea, but these people 2 or 3 months ago raised their hands in favor of going back to Katif region. It is perceived as totally unreasonable by most of the Israeli public, but they think that it is logical. So what we see is a minority in this government that hold captive all the rest and advances their causes at the expense of the State of Israel. Because you are now holding the most troubled person portfolio, are you afraid or concerned about the existence of the State of Israel in the long run? If I take what the Minister of Finance said, following what Gadi just said, 2 or 3 days ago, that he has a plan that within a very short time he will bring about he will double the number of settlers. Right that minute you can say, forget about the Zionist dream, period. Between the sea and the Jordan River today, there are 15 million people who live. Today, between the sea and the Jordan River, it's about half and half. If we now take and add another 500,000 in Judea and Samaria, right that minute, and there's no chance in the world for an apartheid state to exist in the 21st century. It was very difficult in the 20th century. That merely says that this is a state of all its citizens whose reverse opposite is that of the Zionist dream, and the Knesset would no longer be called Knesset, it would be a majlis, and everyone has to understand. And this is where this messianic Smotrich is leading all of us with the very same 4 that somehow joined him. Not yesterday, but a long time before. And this is where we're headed. So if that is a risk for the existence of the State of Israel, perhaps it would be called a different name over time. And perhaps the anthem will no longer be Hatikva, but this is where we're being led to. And I'm convinced that at least 95% of the citizens of the state would never sign this, would never agree to it. But the fact that they're being misled by manipulations, lies that turn into truths, false presentations, and bribe, that's what's actually leading us there. Shaike Bereket, if I remember. What do we do? What do we do? Shaike, please stay healthy and well. We never planned to introduce. It's unplanned, right? This is not staged. It's from my heart that I speak, and I'm nearly 90, and for more than 70 years ago, I completed the combat pilot's course with excellence, and since then it's been my country. So I would like to address your question to the panel. What do you do? Now it's your role. Now it's your turn. You can take the mic. Do you want to say that you can't hear me? Beyond the ocean, they hear me, and I was not joking. I was the head of the intel. I was 22 years old of the Six-Day War. Yes, I have certain rights in this country. I was the person, when I was a great hero already, somebody came to visit me, and I asked him, "Who are you?" And he said, "My name is Argov, Shlomo Argov. I am from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I came to see what's happening here." I approached the commander of the Air Force. I was the head of the intel of the Air Force, Brigadier General, just a kid. And the commander of the Air Force said, "Whatever you want, you can do." I invited him at midnight, and I said, "This is when the Mossad operation starts. Look at the watch. Our planes took off. Nobody knows anything." And I said, "The bombs drop on all the most important airports in Egypt." He saw it and he said, "Look, they don't understand in Jerusalem what is happening here." And then, that's an excellent statement. They don't understand what's happening in Jerusalem. I would like to hang on to it and ask Amir Eshel, how do we come out? Shaike Bareket is asking, you mentioned Smotrich's name. It's to actually give a discount. Ultimately, the Prime Minister is called Netanyahu. All three of you have hundreds of hours with Netanyahu. What passes through his mind? This is a cautious, pragmatic, smart, knowledgeable person. He knows America, he knows Saudi Arabia, he knows what's happening. How do you come out of this, Amir? You asked two questions. The Netanyahu that I know is not the Netanyahu that we see now, at least based on my knowledge, and I'm sure that others share my opinion. The second thing, in Golani they ask, what does Pedro do tomorrow morning? And I think that we need to look at these four elements. The state will not be able to continue the current trend if these elements, each separately and all together, are to impact the final result. What do I mean? That the protest must continue. It has a lot of power. There was a total miscalculation, I believe, of those who thought about this coup concerning the response of the public in Israel. This is the first miscalculation. The second one is the issue of economy. And this is where we're driving. It can be this slope or that slope, but that's where we're headed. And that, too, is a very significant factor that you won't be able to continue and run things as if it doesn't exist. The third thing is the military, mostly the reserves. If the state continues in this direction, there would be no reserve forces in Israel. It's not just the Air Force or the pilots or the elite units or the doctors. It's dozens of thousands of reserve soldiers whose contract between them and the country has been violated and breached. All the reserve soldiers in the state of Israel are volunteers. There's no problem avoiding military service. Only 1% does it. So that's a third factor. And the fourth one, with all the difficulties, I said, nobody said no yet. There was no objection yet. But you cannot ignore the fact that it's potentially there because it breaks this fabric. And not only the reserve soldiers, which is the immediate step, who would want to send their kids to such an army? And the last thing is the international thing, and mostly the relations with the U.S. All those factors, if the government carries on walking in that direction, it suspended things a while, they will grow stronger. And the combination of all four means that the government would not be able to persevere in the directions that it's now aiming toward. It won't be able to. This is what we must continue. Gadi? A joint effort of the social protest of the best sons and daughters of this country who stopped this regime coup. I give them the credit, not the people who operate in the Knesset, even though the work is joint. You also agreed that Gantz would be Chief of General Staff for you. The result of the elections are clear. There's a strong coalition. There's a struggle in the Knesset, but we have to admit the truth. There's a very solid, homogeneous majority. We should not despair. We should make every effort to prevent this government from harming this country, like the reform, like the recruitment law and other things that were blocked. And the effort has to be to topple this government, replace it with another. And this is what we do in a democratic way of many good citizens who would be convinced that the right way is the other way, not the way that leads the state of Israel nowadays. And to make every effort to protect the national interests of the State of Israel and also do it in the Knesset and bring about elections in the near future. Do you believe Netanyahu that Netanyahu suspends it truly? Or maybe that's just a typical Netanyahu trick to try it and find a different loophole? Because yours truly, and I too know him, that's his way of killing things, and perhaps we should allow him to kill it that way. He understands that there's a clash of the two main values, and that is the democratic and the Jewish. In a survey held 3 months ago, 44% of the residents of this state thought that the leading value was the democratic, and 35% that the Jews, assuming that these two values are the central ones that clash. When I look back and I try to learn how he behaved in a similar event where the challenge was over the Jewish, not the democratic, then in 2014 there was the Shaket Committee. It was passed by first reading. The recruitment law, Derry and Gaffney objected and said, okay, let there be a demonstration of 1 million and general protest and riots. And Netanyahu just pushed it under the carpet and said that the ultra-Orthodox, God forbid, would not be recruited. Here, damage was caused to this country. Every day we're lingering behind, being in that swamp of uncertainty. A damage is caused to the State of Israel, social, economic, and international. He understands that. He's trying to get to something small so that it will be possible to explain. We don't have time for this. We have to push away this cloud and to strive for a reform, not a coup. And then you'll be able to find people who have the acceptance of the vast majority and know how to handle the judiciary, not allow for politicians to take over the committee for naming judges. And the worthy cause is to reach at the president's mention a team that would formulate the basic laws, and that would serve as a foundation for future constitution. Regretfully, human beings change over the years, following physiological changes and following different positions they take. Very often the change is not for the better. If we look at what is happening in the last few years, I argue that there is a very, very clear trend. It's not something that is done, without really meaning that it would happen. The Prime Minister did not recognize the previous government. He did not turn to one time to the previous Prime Minister with his title, Mr. Prime Minister. He did not recognize the government that received the blessing of the Knesset. And no one, and we just, took it very naturally. The meaning it bears is critical in a democratic country, because just like we expect today, and justly so, to accept the fact that there is a Knesset of 64 that chose the government, and I accept it even though I don't like it, he did not accept it. And many of his party did not accept it. And this process can be seen, and it grows and advances. What is happening right now is merely tactical withdrawals. It is a worldview that has been formulated in the last few years. I hear what Gadi is saying and what Amir is saying. Take the Iranian case. This is a colossal problem that actually against which what happened in Yom Kippur is paid in comparison. See what the Chief of the General Staff of America says, what the U.S. says, and what people of the Intel are saying here. I don't see Intel people on a daily basis, but suffices to hear the news and understand where Iran stands. When was the last time you heard anyone relating to this issue? It was pushed to the back burner because it's got nothing to do with personal interests anymore. There are those who adopted, when I said Smotrich, those who chose him as the financial minister is the prime minister. The person who gave him powers to present a distorted budget is the prime minister. In other words, the prime minister bears the responsibility, but all the ministers, and there are so many of them now, they should not forget one thing. According to the law in the State of Israel, they bear collective responsibility. Each and every one of them has given his consent to what is happening now. And regretfully, I do hope that the opposition would do its job. But it is so difficult to reach any agreements between those who say, I don't want to see any democracy here anymore, and those who say, let's try to reach this compromise or other. Hence, the only place where that would be decided is the public protest. That would be legal, lawful, in line with the rules, but it has enormous power. And I also think that 90% of the citizens of this state want to live in a democratic country. They want their children and grandchildren would live in such a country. Amir, can we say that Iran is a nuclear threshold country? You can say that it is closer than ever to its nuclear power. It already behaves as one. It still doesn't have a bomb. Tamir mentioned the evaluation of the Americans at their space. The distance that they have is a lot shorter than what we deemed it to be. In the past, it was exactly the opposite. And I think that Iran at the moment, and that's a result of many processes, it's not only the Iranian behavior. Iran brought China to the Middle East. The Americans are now willing to work with the Saudi Arabians on many things as a result of the fact that they understand that into this vacuum that is perceived by leaders in the area that the U.S. is pulling out. It's not really pulling out, but its presence is diminished. China entered, the Iranians have allies, Russia, and they're totally entangled in their own problems, but a new axis has been formed, and you cannot ignore it. The best, litmus test is what happened after the Emirates reached Tehran, the Saudi Arabians go to Tehran. We saw it in the past. Whenever there was any development, the Americans pulled back, and the King of Jordan sent a representative. Never ever will there be a vacuum. This is why the struggle gains strength. It's irrelevant to say that that's enough. No, we are strong. We'll know how to contend with it. I'm deeply troubled by the continued trend that Tamir is talking about. The gaps that are formed are wider and wider. It necessitates handling. I definitely talk about that matter, but it has to go back to the front of the stage. But it would not exempt us from treating the root causes, the root problems. Our people prove that we have a certain bug in our DNA. Once in a while, we're trying to destroy ourselves for some reason. So I would like to appoint you, Gadi, and ask you to say something positive before we end. We're fortunate that we're not calling Amos Gilad, because then everyone would run for their lives. But when we talk about the speech of Aspasianus, the Roman Caesar, outside of the borders of Jerusalem, whose legions spurred him to take over the city, he said the Jews do it themselves, and he was right. Before we put fire to the entire city, we never come down. Can you look optimistically at how we can emerge from this crisis? I participated in all the protests from the first until a week or 2 weeks ago, and all those who are there can draw a lot of strength from what they see, because they see the best minds of these people who care, who take to the streets and struggle for the future of a country which in their eyes has to be Jewish, but also democratic, liberal. And they fight for that. And you can gain a lot of optimism from the energy you can find there. And I assume if another attempt is made to realize this, attempt to move forward, we're at the threshold of turning into a dictatorship. So this is a dictatorship threshold country. We're not there yet, but the energy that can be seen in the Israeli society surprised the government greatly. The IDF officers have this provision that tells them to live what is happening in their unit. Those who lead this revolution do not know what they were bound to face. And from this you can gain a lot of strength. The trick is not to have one side overpower the other. What needs to happen is for all of us to sit together despite our disagreements and reach a new social covenant for the continued building of the shared home. When you look 75 years back, you can be so at awe with what is happening here, but to be very concerned at what is happening now. So if the strength is found on every side to find a way to bolster our shared home, things will change. And the high-tech people and all those people of great privileges leave everything they have and fight for this country. Do you share this iota of optimism? They blocked the Gallant dismissal, for example. I'm sure this country will once again stand on its feet because we have no other alternative. We have nowhere to go to. There's no other place on this globe that would wait for us with open arms. We have a bitter experience with that, and I believe that most of the citizens of the State of Israel want the same thing, and that's to start talking about it, about those different issues of church and state. Topics pertaining to the political solution to the Palestinian problem. We have to talk about all the burning issues that brought us with great success of politicians over 75 years. And it's not only from one side to actually numb the real issues. And as soon as you anesthetize them, like anything else, nothing resolves itself. At one point, everything breaks out and erupts. One more word. Yes, Tamir. There is hope. Yeah, there is hope. As Shevach Weiss said, and Golda said this, we've got no place to go. And we tried Europe, said Shevach Weiss already. So Commander of the Air Force and former Director General of the Ministry of Defense, Amir Eshel, former Chief of General Staff, Mr. Gadi Eisenkot, and former Mossad head, Tamir Pardo. Thank you very much. It was so interesting.